Up to now, the Epstein saga has been a story of sexual depravity by reckless men and the seductive power of big money. But now, with the latest revelations from the Epstein files, this modern morality tale enters the world of power politics. There's Peter Mandelson, who last night quit the Labour Party. Keir Starmer has called on him to leave the House of Lords as well. Also today, jaw-dropping allegations of leaks from the heart of Downing Street during the financial crisis and calls from opposition leaders Kemi Badenoch and Stephen Flynn of the SNP for criminal investigation into Lord Mandelson. We'll discuss him in more detail later in the show. But let me begin tonight with something that I think is even more important, even more extraordinary: growing suspicions of a Russian connection. Epstein had apparently limitless supplies of money. Where did it come from? He procured many young Russian girls. Why was that so easy for him? The files released show more than 1,000 documents which referred to Vladimir Putin, and 9,000 referring to Moscow. The FBI says that he was Putin's wealth manager. Epstein filed all of his messages. He filmed and taped powerful Western leaders in deeply compromising situations. Why? Doesn't it make you wonder at least about the possibility of a KGB operation big enough to ensnare former presidents and prime ministers and the leaders of some of the world's most powerful companies? I know, this all sounds impossibly sensational, conspiratorial, a James Bond villain plot in real life. But there is so much smoke billowing out of one of the most extraordinary establishment crises in my lifetime that it is well worth exploring whether there might be also a genuinely ominous backstory. All day, Keir Starmer's government has been scrambling to keep up. Here's the Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister, Darren Jones, in the Commons about an hour ago.
Peter Mandelson must account for his actions and conduct. It is an understatement, Madam Deputy Speaker, to say that his decision to continue a close relationship with a convicted paedophile, including discussing private government business, falls far below the standards expected of any minister. His behaviour was unequivocally wrong and an insult to the women and girls who suffered. The Prime Minister believes, as does the government, that Peter Mandelson should not retain his membership of the House of Lords or use his title.
Well, let's begin tonight with Misha Glenny, author of McMafia, A Journey Through the Global Criminal Underworld, and a journalist who specialises in cybersecurity and Russian affairs. Misha, great to have you breaking your duck on this show. I laid out there some of the circumstantial evidence which might point to a Russian connection of some substance. I haven't joined the dots, but do you think these are dots worth looking at?
I certainly think they're worth looking at. I would also place, before I get into the Russian stuff, place it into the broader context of the extraordinary international network that Epstein had developed, which we were first alerted to with the previous release of documents, a lot to do with Central Europe and far-right movements in Central Europe, a lot linking Epstein to Steve Bannon, the former chief of staff for Trump during his first administration, a lot to do with India, Israel, and now to do with Russia as well. The Russian material is, at the moment, I have to say, circumstantial,
yes,
except for certain emails that Epstein sent in particular to his contact, Sergei Belyakov, who was at the time, this is in 2015 and before, was Russia's Deputy Minister of Economic Development. But Belyakov did have contacts to the FSB, it is thought. He graduated from the FSB Intelligence Academy, so he would have been connected. And they discuss about providing women for various men in the United States. That's a classic FSB tactic, the honey trap. So there's a lot of circumstantial evidence, certainly.
And Misha, from what you've seen so far, we think that Epstein met Putin, perhaps on several occasions, but we don't have hard evidence of that, do we?
No, we don't. And until we have hard evidence, I'm very reluctant to suggest that this might have taken place simply because there is so much rumor and half-truths around Epstein. And we know, of course, that half of the documentation that the Justice Department in the US holds has still not been released. And a lot of the material has been so heavily redacted, yes, you can't really work out what's going on.
I mean, on the one hand, it's very dangerous to blame the Russians for everything going wrong in the world. On the other hand, there are stories which, although they're completely implausible, turn out to be true. Epstein's also connected to Mossad through the connection with Robert Maxwell and all of that. And again, there are suggestions that not only was he a financial advisor to Putin, but also to Robert Mugabe. So these tentacles go in every direction.
They do. That's what's so interesting is that he seemed to be a really effective one-man pander to the community that grew up around the time of McMafia, of corrupt politicians and increasingly autocratic politicians who wanted to deal with each other and wanted to gain all the benefits from it, like money, power, and also access to women. So he seems to have set himself up as a global power broker, and there are few countries or politicians who he didn't have contacts with at some point or another.
Yeah, you mentioned, Misha, a moment ago the Eastern European connection and Steve Bannon and the involvement of all those far-right parties. Just tell us a little bit more about those and Epstein.
Well, one of the biggest victims so far victims is the wrong word. One of the biggest people to fall so far is a man named Miroslav Lajcek, who I know well because for many years he was the EU's envoy to the Western Balkans, trying to discuss the possibility of integrating the Western Balkans into the European Union. He is the national security advisor of Robert Fico, the Slovak prime minister, who is a leading far-right figure in Europe. And Lajcek was deeply involved both with the Bannon connection, facilitating Bannon's access to various people in Europe, but also discussing in a rather distasteful fashion women with Epstein himself. So there's that. Bannon was also using Epstein to get in touch with the former Austrian Prime Minister Sebastian Kurz, and another populist. And also, interestingly enough, the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi used Epstein in order to try and ingratiate himself with various key people in Washington, including Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law.
These ripples just carry on going further and further and further. What a jaw-dropping story. Misha Glenny, thank you very, very much indeed for that. I want to turn now to a man who knows more about Epstein than almost anybody else does, Barry Levine. He's the author of The Spider, Inside the Tangled Web of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Barry, great to have you on the show again. I'd be very interested in your reflections on the connections between Epstein, it appears, through these files, and the Russians and Mossad and various other figures around the world. This is a global story now.
There's no question that this is a global story, and as we continue to go through the documents, we learn more and more. And of course, Jeffrey Epstein was a collector of people. The more powerful, the better. And these people came from the political world, the financial world, and particularly he really pursued people that could do him favors. And with the Russians, of course, you have to understand that Jeffrey Epstein was moving a lot of money through Russian banks. Senator Ron Wyden here in Washington has been going down that financial road. There was more than $1 billion in suspicious wire transfers, money moved through not only American banks, but Russian banks. And so right now, those finances are being unraveled. But from a practical point of view, Jeffrey Epstein used political currency to, I believe, entrap individuals, to compromise those individuals, and to blackmail individuals. And
so, sorry to jump in. In a sense, it doesn't need to be the KGB. It could just be Jeffrey Epstein himself doing the honey trap, the compromat, and the blackmail.
That's correct. And he went out of his way at the time of President Trump's first election or first time in office in 2016 to offer, and we know this from emails in the files, to offer his expertise about Donald Trump to Russian officials. He was pursuing he was pursuing a meeting with Putin to speak about Trump. Now, we don't know if that ever occurred, but we do know that he viewed what he knew about not only Trump, but about former President Clinton as political currency. And he certainly, without question, had connections related to the incoming girls, that many of them came from Russia. He used modeling fixers to transport these girls overseas for his sex trafficking operation, not only for himself, but for very powerful individuals, at least 20 men that we are aware of that the FBI looked into.
Well, I found your book pretty extraordinary when it came out, but I have to say I'm even more aghast at some of the latest revelations. But for now, thank you very, very much indeed for talking to LBC.